John Jack Marshall stood at the edge of his small farm just before sunrise, breathing in the cool morning air. A thin mist hovered over the rows of corn and soybeans, and dew sparkled on each leaf like tiny diamonds. He wore his old Marine cap, faded green with a small American flag patch, pulled low over his brow. In the quiet moments before the world fully woke, Jack found a deep peace. His strong hands rested on the worn wooden fence as he looked out over the land he had tended for more than a decade. Long ago, Jack had traded his uniform for overalls and boots. He left the Marines after serving 3 tours overseas, each one teaching him lessons about courage, duty, and sacrifice. He had earned medals and respect in faraway places, but he gave them all away when he returned home. The medals sat in a drawer at his small house, forgotten and gathering dust. On the farm, he found a new mission: to grow food, raise animals, and build a life filled with simple but honest work. Today was no different from many others. He began by checking on his herd of goats, soft-haired creatures with curious eyes. Each goat had its own name: Buffy, Jasper, and Little Rosie, who still remembered the warmth of her mother, even though she had lost her as a kid last winter. Jack knelt down to scratch Rosie's head, smiling at her gentle bleat. He spoke to her softly, as if telling a secret, and she leaned into his hand with trust that warmed his heart. Next, he walked to the chicken coop, where a dozen white hens clucked and pecked at the ground. Their coop was solidly built, painted a bright red. That contrasted with the green of the fields. Jack scooped feed into a metal bucket and scattered it on the ground. The hens rushed forward, flapping their wings and squawking in delight. Jack laughed quietly at their excitement. He remembered his first day on the farm, worried he might not be strong enough for the labor. Now each task felt natural, part of the rhythm that shaped his days. As he made his rounds, he remembered his days as a Marine sniper. He had once spent hours lying still in a camouflaged ghillie suit, watching distant targets through a high-powered scope. He learned patience in those long waits. On the farm, he practiced the same patience watching seedlings sprout in the garden, waiting for rain to nourish his crops and caring for animals that depended on him. The discipline he had gained in the military now guided each seed he planted, and each animal he cared for. By mid-morning, the sun was high enough to warm the earth. Jack paused at the edge of the barn to wipe sweat from his forehead with a kerchief. The barn was his workshop and storage space. Inside, hay bales sat stacked high, tools hung neatly on the walls, and an old wooden table held supplies for mending fences and fixing equipment. Jack spent a few minutes repairing a loose hinge on the barn door. The hinge creaked in protest, but held fast under his careful hands. He pressed the door shut and tested it with a shove. It closed firmly, as though saying thank you. Jack's neighbors, the Johnsons, lived a mile down the dirt road. Mrs. Johnson often brought him a jar of homemade jam or a fresh loaf of bread. Mr. Johnson, retired schoolteacher, stopped by too. Chat about world events or share farming tips. Jack enjoyed their company, but he preferred to work alone most of the time. He found comfort in his own thoughts and the steady demands of the land. Sometimes he would gather with the Johnsons on their porch at sunset, swapping stories over iced tea. Laughter came easily in those moments, a sweet reward for the long hours of labor. At noon, Jack returned to the house for a simple lunch, a sandwich made with bread from the Johnsons, cheese from a neighboring dairy, and tomatoes he had picked. That morning, ate on the back porch, where he could watch his fields stretch out toward the horizon. Bluebirds flitted among the trees, and a stray breeze carried the scent of fresh grass and wildflowers. Jack closed his eyes for a moment, savoring the gentle sounds of his world-birds singing, leaves rustling, and the distant hum of a tractor on a neighboring farm. After lunch, Jack checked his mailbox at the end of the driveway. A letter arrived from his only daughter, Emily. She lived in the city now, working as a nurse. She wrote about her day at the hospital, caring for patients with kindness and skill. Jack smiled as he read her words, felt pride swell in his chest, stronger than anything he had felt after receiving a medal. Emily was his greatest accomplishment, and every time she chose to help others, He remembered why he had fought for his country and then worked so hard on his farm in the afternoon sun. Jack headed to the western field where he had planted a row of bright orange pumpkins. He knelt beside a sturdy vine and gently brushed soil away from the largest pumpkin. Its smooth skin gleamed in the light. He whispered to it, imagining the laughter of children when they saw it carved for Halloween. These small moments of connection with the earth filled his heart with quiet joy. As the day wore on, clouds gathered in the sky, rain threatened, and Jack hurried back to the barn to secure his tools and equipment. He fastened the last latch just as the first drops fell in thick splashes. Inside the barn, he paused to listen to the rain drumming on the metal roof. The scent of wet earth rose through the cracks in the wood, and Jack breathed deeply, feeling the world wash clean around him. When the rain eased, Jack returned to the chicken coop to gather fresh eggs. Buffy and Jasper watched from the fence as he reached under the nesting boxes and lifted out warm eggs. He placed them gently in a basket, careful not to break the delicate shells. He planned to deliver them to Mrs. Johnson tomorrow. She would bake a pie or share them with her grandchildren. Jack liked knowing his farm provided more than food. It created moments of happiness for others. That evening, Jack sat on his front porch with a cup of strong coffee. The sky glowed pink and gold as the sun set. He watched the mist rise again from the fields, feeling a deep gratitude for his life. He had seen hardship and danger in his years as a Marine. He had fought battles and faced fear. But on this quiet farm, he found a different kind of purpose. Every seed he sowed, every animal he cared for, and every neighbor he helped fed his soul. As the last light faded, Jack stood and closed his eyes. He felt wind on his face and smelled the faint hint of rain still in the air. He thought of Emily and Mrs. Johnson, of Rosie the goat and the hens tucked into their coop. He thought of the fields waiting for tomorrow's sunrise. In his mind, he replayed a lesson he learned long ago. Real strength came from compassion, patience, and a steady heart. He opened his eyes and walked inside, ready to rest and prepare for another day. Inside his small house, Jack laid out his Marine medals on a wooden table. He did not plan to wear them again, but he wanted them close. They reminded him of the man he once was and the man he had become. He turned off the lamp and climbed into bed, falling asleep to the sound of rain tapping on the window pane. Tomorrow, he would rise before dawn once more, ready to work the land, care for his animals, and uphold the quiet courage that guided his life. And in that courage, Jack found his true home. The night was heavy with heat and shadows. Jack lay in his single bed, the fan whirring softly above him, but sleep came slowly. His mind replayed the day's work, tending goats, repairing fences, gathering eggs. He felt a deep satisfaction in each task. Outside, cicadas droned in the trees, and the distant hum of a tractor lulled him toward rest. At last, he drifted off, unaware how soon his peaceful farm life would shatter. Hours later, around 2 a.m, the world outside Jack's house came alive with hushed voices. He stirred but did not wake fully. The wind carried muffled footsteps and the soft clatter of tools being handled. In his sleep, he sensed something was wrong, but the safety of dreamland held him tightly. In the darkness, he twisted for comfort and sank deeper into his blankets. Meanwhile, under a sliver of moonlight, a small group of young men crept across Jack's fields. They moved quickly, their boots sinking into the soft soil. One carried a length of rope, another held a flashlight. They wore loose t-shirts and baggy jeans. Their faces were set in excited grins. They whispered cruel jokes about how no one would stop them. They thought Jack, an elderly black farmer, would be too afraid to challenge a gang of city boys. They reached the goat pen first. The wooden fence was low and easy to step over. Inside, the goats slept, their soft breath rising and falling in the quiet air. The intruders laughed softly and began to cut the ropes that held the goat pen gate closed. They opened it wide and prodded the goats with rough shoves. The goats, confused and frightened, bleated softly as they stumbled onto the grass. The men caught them one by one, tying ropes around their necks and dragging them away. Jack remained asleep, but in his dreams, A distant bleat tugged at him. He muttered and shifted, but still he did not wake. Outside, the men worked quickly. He killed 3 of his prize goats, Buffy, Jasper, a small Rosie, so swiftly that the other goats barely had time to react before they were gone. The men stuffed the bodies into the back of a pickup truck. One of them joked about how Jack would never suspect these boys from the wrong side of the tracks. Next, they turned toward the chicken coop. The coop stood alone in a clearing, its bright red walls now dull in the night. Inside, Jack's hens clucked quietly as they slept on their perches. The men set to work. They pried the coop door open and shooed the birds into a corner. A flashlight beam showed dozens of white hens, wide-eyed and trembling. With no thought for life or kindness, the men struck at the hens with wooden boards. Some of the boards missed, and the birds scattered, flapping their wings in panic. Others fell still. The men laughed when they saw the devastation. By the time they finished, only a few hens remained alive, too frightened to move. The final cruelty came when they tossed a burning rag into the coop. The rag caught on the dry straw and hay that lined the floor. Flames leaped up quickly, eating the wooden slats from the inside out. The few surviving hens squawked and fluttered, but their escape was blocked by the burning boards. The intruders ran back to their truck and sped away, leaving the fire to grow and crackle in the night. Inside his house, Jack finally awakened, blinked at the soft glow of the clock. 2:37 a.m. His dreams had been strange and uneasy. He listened. Silence. The fan was still humming, but beyond his walls nothing else stirred. No dogs barking, no engine noises. He swung his legs out of bed and wrapped his feet around his sturdy boots. Something told him to check on his animals. He carried a flashlight out the back door. The porch light was weak, but the beam from his flashlight cut through the darkness. As he neared the barn, he smelled smoke. The scent was faint at first, but it grew stronger with each step. He paused by the barn door, shining his light toward the chicken coop. Flames licked at the red wood, and a dull roar of burning straw filled the night air. Fear shot through Jack's heart, but it was sharper than fear and gore. He had felt danger before, but this was different. This was a home, a place of peace, under attack. He raced to the coop door and tried the latch. It was hot to the touch, but he yanked it open and stepped back. The coop's roof was already aflame. He heard the last weak cluck of a hen, and then a soft thud as the fire took it. He grabbed a bucket and ran to the small pond nearby. Moonlight glinted on the water's surface. He filled the bucket and raced back, tossing water at the burning walls. The bucket hissed and steamed, but the fire raged on. He emptied 2 more buckets, then heard a groan from the goat pen. He ran toward the pen, shining his light on broken boards. The gate lay open. Inside, the bodies of Buffy, Jasper, and Rosie lay in the straw, lifeless. Other goats paced back and forth, bleating in confusion. Jack pressed a hand to his mouth to hold back a cry. The pain in his chest felt like a heavy stone. His animals, his friends, were dead. He sank to his knees. Beside Rosie, her small body cold and still. He closed her eyes gently and stroked her fur. The other goats crowded around him, pressing their soft heads against his legs. They seemed to understand that their friend was gone. Jack breathed heavily, tears stinging his eyes. His chest ached with grief and rage. He thought of how Rosie loved the morning sun and how Jasper nudged him for treats. This should not have happened. Jack stood, trembling. The fire in the chicken coop still crackled. He ran to the barn and grabbed a garden hose. He turned it on full blast, training the water at the small flames that still burned. The coop's roof collapsed with a loud crack, and smoke billowed out. He worked until every ember was dead. Then he turned off the hose and leaned against the barn wall, shivering in the cool night air. Dawn was a pale gray line on the horizon when Jack finally returned to the house. His clothes were soaked with sweat and water, and his hands were blistered from slamming buckets and hoses. He paused at the back door, feeling the weight of the night's loss settle on him like a cloak. Inside, he poured himself a cup of coffee, black and strong. He sat at the small kitchen table, staring at the cup as if it might hold answers. He felt hollow, as if his farm, the place he had built with love, had been stolen in a single, terrible hour. He He finished the coffee in one steady gulp and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. Then he walked outside again, this time in the soft light of early morning. The fields were quiet, the only sound a lone crow calling in the distance. He followed the trail of hoofprints in the dirt leading from the pen toward the road. He knelt beside the bodies of his goats, touching each one tenderly. The sun rose higher, and a small breeze stirred. The breeze felt like a promise life moves forward even after sorrow. Jack stood and squared his shoulders. He would find out who did this. He would make sure justice was done, not for revenge, for protection. No one would harm his farm again. He would stand guard, watch over the fields, as he once watched over distant battlefields. The farm was his home, and he would defend it. He walked back to the house and dialed the sheriff's office. His voice was calm but firm as he reported the slaughtered animals and the burned coop. He refused to guess who did it. He gave the facts. 3 goats dead, most hens lost, fire damage. He asked for help. The sheriff assured him deputies would come. Jack hung up and took a deep breath. He felt the first spark of resolve warm him from within. He would not let this night define his life. He would rebuild the coop, honor the memory of his animals, and keep watch. His farm would survive, and so would he. In the distance, the road lay empty. Soon deputies would arrive, and neighbors would come to offer support. But for now, Jack stood alone in the early morning light, a man shaped by hard work and quiet strength. He wiped his tears, squared his shoulders, and began the long day of cleanup and repairs, knowing that every nail he hammered and every board he fixed brought him closer to peace again. Jack woke before dawn again, his mind heavy from the night's terror. He sat on the edge of his bed, breathing in slow, steady breaths. The memory of fallen goats and burned henhouse pressed against his chest like a weight. He knew he needed help, but he also knew that no help would feel strong enough until he did something himself. He dressed quietly in his plain work clothes, slipping into worn boots that had carried him through so many fields and faraway deserts. Outside, the farm lay still under a pale sky. The air smelled of damp earth and fresh promise. Jack fetched his flashlight from the workbench and stepped into the cool morning. He walked the same path he had on the night of the attack, pausing at the goat pen. The bodies had been removed by deputies, but the empty stalls and broken boards still stood as a silent witness. Jack ran his hand along a splintered plank, his fingertips tracing the marks of violence. The goats were gone, but their absence spoke loudly in the hush. Soon, neighbors began to arrive. Mrs. Johnson pulled up in her old pickup, her face drawn with concern. She gave Jack a pot of coffee in a chipped enamel mug and set it beside him. Mr. Johnson followed, carrying a loaf of homemade bread wrapped in a cloth. They stood together in the yard, 2 kind faces in a small crowd that grew as morning light spread across the fields. "Jack," Mrs. Johnson said, her voice soft, "we're all so sorry. We'll help you rebuild the coop. You name the time, we'll be there." Jack nodded and lifted the coffee to his lips. The hot liquid washed down his throat, and he felt a faint warmth begin to flow through him. "Thank you," he said quietly. He looked at the faces around him, farmers and families who had shared his smiles at community dinners, who had waved when he drove by on his tractor. They had come without question, ready to stand with him. The sheriff arrived next, a tall man, with a kind but serious expression. He shook Jack's hand and said, "We're doing our best to find who did this. We'll patrol more often and we'll step up investigations. I promise you that." Jack met the sheriff's eyes. He appreciated the promise, but he also understood that sometimes police work could take time. He thought of his days in the corps when he could not wait for orders. He had to act sometimes with nothing more than his own 2 hands and his training. He did not want vengeance. He wanted safety. He wanted to know that no one else would suffer as he had. The sheriff nodded and turned to organize deputies. Nearby, the crowd began to break up. Mrs. Johnson squeezed Jack's arm, and he nodded again. He watched the neighbors go, returning to their own chores. The farm felt both full of support and still lonely. The noise of their leave-taking echoed louder than their arrival. Jack set down his coffee and turned toward the fields. He had work to do, repairs to begin, plans to make. He felt a familiar rhythm rise inside him. Focus, patience, action. He walked to the barn door and opened it. Inside, he found the old marine duffel bag, worn and dusty. He carried it outside and unzipped it. Inside lay a neatly folded ghillie suit, a small combat knife in its sheath, and an old map case. He had not touched these items for years, but they were part of him, part of the man he had been. Jack took the knife in his hand. The blade was sharp and well-balanced. He ran his thumb along the spine, feeling the cool steel. He remembered how, in distant sandstorms, he had relied on his blade for survival. Then he set it back in its sheath and hung it on the fence post. An old friend, ready if needed. He did not want to use it. But just knowing it was there gave him a measure of control he had lost in the night's chaos. He retrieved the map case and opened it. Inside, maps of far-off deserts and mountain passes spread out. He studied them, tracing lines with his finger. His homeland was here, not on those maps. Yet the charts reminded him of planning, of watching terrain, of attending to details. He took a small notebook from his pocket and sketched a rough map of his own farm fences, pens, fields, driveway, woods beyond. He drew little marks at corners, where he planned motion lights. He noted where cameras could watch the barn and the gates. His handwriting was neat, disciplined, precise. He folded the notebook and tucked it back in his pocket. Morning chores awaited. He walked to the goat pen, lifted broken boards, and inspected the soil. He cleared away splinters and nails. He gathered tools from the barn, hammer, nails, a sturdy plank. As he worked, he spoke to himself softly, step by step. Measure twice, cut once. Watch the angles. Reinforce this post and add a latch that locks firmly. He built with the same care he had learned in basic training, slow, controlled movements, checking each joint for strength. After hours of work, he paused under a maple tree. His shirt was damp with sweat, and the sun rose higher in the sky. He drank from his canteen and allowed himself a moment to rest. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. In that breath, he felt the ghost of battlefields behind him, the echo of distant orders. He let it go and brought his mind back to the farm. Here was his mission now, guard this land. That evening, Jack made a plan for the night. He set motion lights above the goat pen and the coop remains. He placed his old binoculars on the porch railing, facing toward the tree line where the intruders had come from. He arranged a simple patrol route, one he would walk each hour, from the barn to the pen, then to the chicken area, then along the fence line, before returning to the house to check the door locks and cameras. When the moon rose, Jack set out on his first patrol. The night was quiet, but his flashlight beam cut through shadows like a knife. He moved slowly, scanning every corner. His old habits returned, steady breathing, relaxed shoulders, eyes moving in systematic sweeps. At the edge of the woods, he paused, feeling the hush of trees. He remembered nights on foreign soil, lying still for hours to avoid detection. He felt the same stillness now, but his purpose was different, to protect home. At midnight, he returned to the porch and checked the cameras. The screens showed empty fields, but Jack watched them carefully. He noticed a small raccoon that darted across the frame. He chuckled softly. Not every movement was a threat. He hit record, saving the clip for evidence. Then he tuned his ears to the night sounds, wind and leaves, distant owl calls, the soft hum of his motion lights clicking on and off. He waited, alert but calm. After his hour was up, he went back inside. He wrote a quick note in his notebook, patrol completed, no signs of movement other than wildlife. He set the notebook on the table and poured himself a cup of tea. He sat by the window, watching the lights he had installed. The coop area glowed softly, the goat pen bathed in gentle illumination. He felt more secure already. All through the next day, Jack continued repairs. He rebuilt the chicken coop from the ground up, using stronger wood and a fire-resistant roof. He reinforced the goat pen with metal wire mesh. He added locks and mounted motion sensors. Each step was deliberate, each choice made with care. Neighbors stopped by at intervals with supplies. A neighbor's son brought extra lumber. Another friend lent a spare camera. In each gesture, Jack sensed the circle of community strengthening around him. That night he patrolled again. The rhythm felt natural. Now prepare, act, observe, record. By the third patrol he caught himself smiling at how focused he felt. The old Marine in him was not angry or eager for battle. He was simply alert, determined, and disciplined. Fear and sorrow transformed into purpose. On the fourth patrol, something changed. Jack saw a faint shape moving at the edge of the camera's view. He froze, heart steady, and adjusted his binoculars. Two figures crouched by the fence, whispering. He recognized the silhouette of teenage boys. They lingered for a moment, maybe, debating whether to proceed. Then they slipped back into shadows. Jack's pulse remained calm. Went inside and reviewed the footage. His motion lights had caught their movement. He saved the clip and called the sheriff. He gave a precise description to young men, dark clothes, under 6 feet tall. Moving along the north fence at about 1:15 a.m. by morning, deputies returned with more officers. They thanked Jack for the footage and promised increased patrols. Jack felt relief wash over him. His efforts had made a difference. Did not need guns or violence. He used planning, technology, and steady courage to protect his home. He nodded to the sheriff and said quietly, "I'm ready to help however I can." Over the next few days, the tension eased. The coop stood strong and safe. The goat pen was secure. Jack continued evening patrols, but now he looked forward to them as part of his routine. He watched the fields with satisfaction, knowing he had reclaimed his peace. It awakened the warrior he had once been, not to seek conflict, but to guard what he loved. In the calm after the storm, Jack found a new balance. The farm was his battlefield now, but he fought with tools, light, and vigilance. He honored the memory of his fallen animals by protecting the living. He stood in quiet strength, a legendary Marine turned humble farmer, ready for whatever challenge might command, certain that he would meet it with the same steady heart that had guided him on distant shores and now beneath the open sky of home. Jack woke early again, but this time he felt different. The alarm in his mind was gone. He had watched, prepared, and taken small victories each day. The farm felt safer, yet he knew the gang might try again, would meet them not with anger, but with calm resolve. Today, he planned to draw a line they could not cross. He began the morning as usual, checking his fields and animals. The goats nibbled fresh grass behind their sturdy fence. The new chicken coop stood bright and whole at the edge of the yard. Jack greeted each animal by name: Buffy, Jasper, Rosie, though only Buffy and Jasper remained from before. The others were gentle newcomers, part of the farm's new chapter. Jack smiled at them, feeling their trust in him. By late morning, sheriff's deputies visited again. They brought news. They had identified 2 suspects from the footage Jack had provided. The young men lived in town and were known for minor troublemaking. The deputies planned to question them later that day. Jack listened, nodding. He did not want punishment at all costs. He wanted safety and a clear message that violence against his home would not be tolerated. After the deputies left, Jack went to the barn to ready his patrol gear. He checked the batteries in his flashlight made sure the cameras were angled correctly, and filled his notepad with notes. He then retrieved his old Marine canteen and filled it with water. Even in training, he had learned to stay hydrated. He hung the canteen at his hip and slung the binoculars around his neck. He packed a small first aid kit just in case and tucked his knife back into its sheath, though he did not expect to use it. That afternoon, neighbors offered to help with more repairs, but Jack gently declined. He needed this moment alone. The farm was his responsibility. Every board he hammered, every nail he drove, reminded him of his own strength. He felt calm, focused, and ready. As dusk approached, Jack finished planting new seedlings in his vegetable garden. The sky glowed pink and orange, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of earth and growing things. He turned off the tractors and tools, then walked to the porch to sip a cup of tea. My eyes watched the horizon. mindful of the rising moon. Tonight, he would be the sentinel. At 9 p.m., Jack began his patrol. His steps were quiet but purposeful. He walked the same route, from the barn to the goat pen, then to the chicken coop, along the western fence, and finally back to the house. Each area was well lit by the new motion lights. Pause at the goat pen and watch the animals. They lay calmly, safe behind strong wire. He felt pride in what he had built. Half an hour later, near the chicken coop, his flashlight beam caught a slight movement. Two figures crept near the fence, their heads down, their posture tense. Jack's heart rate stayed steady. He raised the binoculars and studied them. They were the same two boys he had seen before, dark clothes, low voices. They paused by the new coop, peering inside. Jack stepped forward, his boots soft on the grass. He did not rush. He did not shout. Instead, he spoke in a firm, clear voice. "I see you there." The boys jumped. One dropped his flashlight, and it spun like a fallen star before it rolled away. The other reached for something in his pocket. Jack raised a single finger. "Stand back." The boys froze, their eyes wide. Jack kept his binoculars hanging and his hands visible. He did not draw his knife. He did not make threats. He simply stood his ground, a calm but solid figure bathed in the glow of motion lights. He remembered his Marine training. De-escalation is strength, not fear. One boy swallowed and stammered, We're sorry, sir." His voice cracked. The older one said, "We didn't mean to. Thought you weren't home." They glanced at each other, guilt and fear mixing on their faces. Jack lowered his binoculars and closed the distance slowly, never breaking eye contact. He spoke softly, but firmly. "This is my home. These animals are my family. You harmed them once. I won't let it happen again." The boys flinched under his gaze. Jack continued, "I've already called the sheriff. They know who you are. If you came back, they'll come too." He paused. "But I want to give you a chance to do the right thing. Now." The older boy's shoulders slumped. He looked at his friend, then back at Jack. "We'll cooperate," he said quietly. "We'll tell the truth." The younger one nodded, eyes filling with tears. "I'm sorry for killing your goats. I didn't know. I didn't think." Jack held out his hand. "Let's go." The boys lowered their heads and walked forward. Jack guided them toward the porch, where he used his cell phone to call the sheriff. By the time deputies arrived, the boys stood there, contrite and silent. Deputies quickly took the boys into custody. Jack explained what had happened, providing details and the boys' full confessions. The sheriff gave Jack a respectful look. "You did well. You kept control." Jack nodded. "I wanted them to understand what they did without more harm." After the boys were led away, Jack walked back across his farm under a sky full of stars. The air felt cooler now, as though the night itself was resting easier. He paused at the goat pen and tapped the metal fence. "We did it," he murmured to Buffy and Jasper, who blinked sleepily. He looked toward the chicken coop, now safe and silent. No fire, no fear, just lives protected. He returned to the porch and poured a fresh cup of tea. He sat in his sturdy chair and sipped, savoring the quiet. The field stretched into darkness, safe. The cameras and motion lights stood watch, but he knew he was their guardian too. He felt gratitude for his training, which had taught him not only discipline in battle, but also patience and calm in moments like this. Inside his house, Jack placed his knife back in the drawer with the medals. They reminded him of the past. But tonight, he felt a new pride, a peaceful victory. He had defended his home without violence. He had shown compassion too frightened boys, giving them a chance to admit their wrongdoing. He had upheld justice with courage and care. He settled into bed and closed his eyes. The farm was secure, the animals safe, and the threat removed. He felt his heart slow, his mind clear. He slept soundly that night, knowing he had faced danger once Miranda won it, not with force, but with quiet strength and moral clarity. In the morning, sunlight danced on the fields. Jack stepped outside and inhaled the fresh air. He walked to the barn, ready for another day of work. The lessons of the past week, Grief, preparation, confrontation had led him here. He felt stronger, wiser, and more at peace. He looked down the road where deputies had driven away, taking the boys with them. He hoped those young men would learn from their mistakes and find better paths in life. He had shown them mercy. It was their turn to rebuild. Jack turned back to his farm and smiled. Another day began, full of promise. He would plant seeds, mend fences, care for his animals, and guard his home. In every sunrise, he saw a chance to grow, to heal, and to live with hope. And in his steady heart, he carried the quiet knowledge that true strength comes not from taking life, but from protecting it. Jack woke with the first light of dawn and felt a deep calm settle in his chest. The world outside his window was painted in soft gold and lavender. He lay still for a moment, listening to the gentle hum of the morning. His body ached pleasantly. From days of hard work, it felt good to know the farm was safe again. He slid out of bed without a sound and grabbed his worn boots, pulling them on carefully. Stepping outside, Jack breathed in the fresh air. The fields stretched out before him, quiet and strong. The goat pen stood firm, the new wire mesh gleaming in the light. The chicken coop was whole, its red paint bright and cheerful. 2 hens pecked at the ground nearby, clucking softly. Jack whispered, "Good morning," and the birds looked up, as if to say good morning back. He smiled, feeling a gratitude nudge inside his heart. He walked to the barn and opened the door. Inside, he found his old marine metals laid out neatly. On the wooden table, it had been gathering dust, but now they shone as if they knew they had a story to tell. He ran his fingers over each metal, remembering the battles he had fought and the friends he had lost. But he did not feel sorrow now. He felt pride, for he had used those lessons to protect his farm and his neighbors. Jack took one metal in, his hand, and held it close. He spoke softly to himself. "These are not just for war. They are for courage here at home." Placed the metal back gently and walked out again. A few neighbors were already gathering by the driveway. Word had spread that Jack would speak at the small ceremony organized by the sheriff's office. Even the Johnsons stood among the crowd, their faces warm with support. The sheriff arrived in his patrol car and stepped out. He wore a uniform that looked crisp in the morning sun. He walked over to Jack and extended his hand. "Ready, Marine?" he asked with a friendly nod. Jack grinned and shook the sheriff's hand. They walked together toward a small wooden stage set up at the edge of the yard. Nearby deputies stood guard, but without weapons drawn. Today was about honor, not force. The stage, a simple podium, held a microphone. Jack climbed the few steps and looked out at the people gathered. There were neighbors he had known for years, local shopkeepers, even the 2 young men who had come to harm his animals. They stood with heads bowed, dressed in plain clothes. Jack felt a tug of compassion. He was about to speak to them too. He cleared his throat and began in a steady voice. "I stand before you today, not just as a farmer, but as someone who has learned about courage in many ways. I learned it in faraway places, wearing a uniform and carrying a rifle. I learned it here on my own land, caring for animals that I loved." He paused, letting the words sink in. The crowd was silent, listening. He continued, "When my goats were taken and my coop was burned, I felt anger and sadness. But I chose to meet that moment with calm resolve. I did not seek revenge. Understanding and justice. I patrolled these fields, I built new fences, and I watched with hope that no harm would come again." He looked toward the goat pen and the coop. "This farm is more than land. It is my home and the heart of our community." Glanced at the 2 young men standing near the sheriff. They shifted uneasily, but met his eyes. He spoke directly. "To them, you 2 boys made a choice that hurt many of us. Yet here you stand, willing to face the consequences. That takes its own kind of courage. I forgive you, and I hope you will learn from this and find a better path." The crowd murmured. Softly, the young men dipped their heads, tears shining in their eyes. Jack felt a swell of compassion, remembered his own youth and the mistakes he had made. His hand reached into his pocket and he pulled out a small notebook of the farm layout. He handed it to the older boy. "Here," he said, "take this. Use it to learn how to build something, not break it. It helped me protect what I love, The sheriff stepped forward and handed Jack a certificate of commendation. The paper was framed simply, but it meant much. It read, "For extraordinary courage, community leadership, and protection of home and farm." Jack took it and held it for all to see. The crowd broke into gentle applause. It was not loud or boisterous. It was respectful and warm. After the ceremony, neighbors brought food and drinks. They set tables under a large oak tree and laid out sandwiches, pies, and fresh fruit. Jack joined them, walking slowly so he could shake hands and smile. Children ran among the tables, laughing as they chased butterflies. A soft breeze stirred the leaves overhead. It felt like a living blessing on the day. Jack sat next to Mrs. Johnson and told her about the plans he had for the fields. He showed her the notebook where he had marked spots for new flowers, places to plant more pumpkins, and a small bench near the pond for watching sunsets. Mrs. Johnson nodded eagerly. "I'll help paint it," she said. "Make it pink or sky blue." Jack laughed. "Let's keep it green, to blend with the trees." They laughed together, as neighbors often do when they share simple joy. The two young men approached Jack hesitantly. The older one said, "Thank you for trusting me. I will learn from you." The younger one added, "I'm sorry for what?" "I did. I want to help rebuild." Jack smiled and shook their hands. "Come by tomorrow morning. We can start on the fence together." Their faces brightened at the offer. They nodded and walked away, heads held a bit higher than before. The sun dipped lower in the sky. Jack stood by the old wooden fence that marked the edge of his property. He rested an elbow on the top rail and looked out at the open fields. The air felt cool and soft. He thought of Emily, his daughter, and how proud she would be if she could see him now. He reached inside his shirt pocket and touched the photo. Of her and her mother smiling together, he felt a warm pride spread through him. A breeze carried the smell of fresh-cut grass and wildflowers. Jack closed his eyes and breathed deeply. He felt the slow, steady rhythm of his heart, the same beat that had guided him through battles and long nights on the farm. He felt gratitude for the lessons of courage, patience, and mercy. He felt at home. Neighbors began to pack up and say their goodbyes. Jack walked among them, thanking each person for their help. The Johnsons hugged him, and the sheriff patted him on the shoulder. The two boys waved as they left with the deputy. Jack waved back and whispered, "Good luck." When the last car had driven down the dirt road, Jack stood alone by his fence. Twilight painted the sky in soft purple and rose. The farm was quiet again, but it felt alive. He walked back toward his house, feeling the solid earth beneath his boots. Inside, he brewed a cup of tea and carried it to the front porch. He sat in his favorite chair and watched the first stars peek out above the horizon. Jack held the certificate in one hand and his tea in the other. He thought of the goats, of Rosie, whose small body had touched his heart so deeply. He thought of the new goats that bleated softly in the pen, thought of the chickens that would cluck in the morning light. He thought of the two boys who would learn to build fence instead of tearing it down. Took a slow sip of tea and let the warmth spread through him. He looked at the medals on the table inside, and then at the fields. Outside, he smiled, knowing that true honor came not just from serving in uniform, but from serving one's home and one's community. He felt whole. Night settled gently over the farm. Jack finished his tea and closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the soft chorus of crickets. He stood and went inside, placing the certificate on the mantel beside the medals, turned off the lamp and climbed into bed. Tomorrow would bring work and new challenges, but he felt ready. As he drifted to sleep, Jack's last thought was a simple one. Home is where courage and compassion meet, and in that meeting, we find our greatest strength. And with that thought, he slept soundly, at peace in the world he had fought to protect and nurture.